Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I was going to talk about something else this week. I was going to devote some time on something else. I really thought I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about, because I mentioned it on here before. Those of you who've been on this have been on my YouTube channel from the beginning know I'm a Cincinnati Reds fan. Last night I was at Cincinnati in a baseball game where it's Pete Rose night at a Great American Ballpark in Cincinnati. I thought, if a night you're going to honor Pete Rose, you don't do it by losing, but they did. And I got in about 2:15 there this morning, coming back from Cincinnati, and slept about 5 hours and was up again. But what happened this week? Pete Rose, Major League Baseball announced that Pete Rose and Joe Jackson were removed from baseball's ineligible list, making them eligible to be elected to the Hall of Fame, baseball's Hall of Fame. And nobody knows for sure whether that'll happen, but now the biggest hurdle has been removed. The biggest obstacle that would keep Rose out of the Hall of Fame has been removed, and he can now be elected to baseball's Hall of Fame. And he passed away recently, and it's a shame they didn't do this beforehand. I was delighted to see it, because Pete Rose was banned for his lifetime from baseball, but he shouldn't be banned from mine. I wanted to see Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame since I was a kid, because I believed I followed him, I watched his career, I was devoted, and I believed he deserved to be in the Hall. Anybody that's followed this knows my respect and admiration for Rose as a ball player, his off the field activities and how he behaved. But the Baseball Hall of Fame is for what you did on the field. It ain't for, we're not electing him to Humanitarian of the Year. He wasn't Husband of the Year. He wasn't Father of the Year. He sure wasn't faithful to his wives. That's no secret. But for what he did on the field, he did it as well and better than anybody. He got more hits than anybody. He played more games than anybody. I think he scored more runs than anyone else. He did some things that were absolutely extraordinary on a baseball field. Every team he played on was better for having him been there. He lifted players to another level. He wasn't the most talented player in the world, but he got every bit of talent he had plus some. A lot of people say he didn't make teams better, but he brought, along with making players around him, and people like Mike Schmidt for the Philadelphia Phillies will tell you he wouldn't have won a World Series without Pete Rose. Pete Rose brought some intangibles to the game that maybe you can't quantify, but he was extraordinary. He lifted everybody up. He was a good guy to play with. Probably nobody would speak too much ill of Rose back on his playing days. Yeah, he had, we know all about the way he, took out Ray Fosse in the 1970 All-Star game, but the man was an extraordinary player. And for what he did on the field and getting more hits than anybody in Major League Baseball, 4,256, he ought to be in the Hall of Fame. Joe Jackson is another issue. Joe Jackson played on the Chicago White Sox, and in 1919 they won their league, and they were going to play the Cincinnati Reds in the 1919 World Series. Everybody, the odds makers, everybody figured that the White Sox would win easily over the Reds, but their owner, Comiskey, who owned the White Sox, he didn't treat his players very fairly. He denied them bonuses, some cases that they earned, and several of them agreed with some gamblers to take money to throw the World Series and lose. And they were, I think, later acquitted for it, but Commissioner Landis threw every one of them out of baseball, and that's kind of when the rule came that anybody involved in baseball would receive a lifetime ban. The precedent for it was the Chicago White Sox, which that World Series became known as the Black Sox Scandal. And it's a fascinating period in history. There's a movie called 8 Men Out that's good to watch if you want to know more about it. But Shoeless Joe Jackson in that World Series, he took $5,000. I believe he was promised 20, and he only got 5. But Shoeless Joe Jackson took money from the gamblers as well. But during that World Series, Jackson hit .375. He never made a single error in the field, and he hit the only home run of that World Series. Almost any baseball player in the major leagues, you told him he could hit .375 in the World Series, he'd jump at it because that's extraordinary. Jackson didn't play that series like a guy that was trying to lose. He took the gambling money, but I don't believe he did anything to help them lose that series. And I know he signed something that admitted his guilt. But one thing you got to know about Joe Jackson is he was illiterate. Jackson couldn't read. So anything he basically put his mark on something he signed. He didn't know what he was signing. He took the word of whoever told him what it was. And so Jackson had no idea. So him to sign this and admit guilt, he may not even had a clue what he was signing. And the people knew he couldn't read, and they took advantage of him, I'm certain. But anyway, the last hurdle's been, and I long said, you let Pete Rose back in baseball, you ought to let Shoeless Joe back in at the same time. And they did that. I don't think it was because of my suggestion. I don't think that impressed them all that much. But they let him back in baseball, and it was the one thing I suggested ought to happen. And I think it's kind of cool that it did. But now Pete Rose is eligible to be put in baseball's Hall of Fame. And according to what I know about the process, and much of it I learned from a close friend I've known since I was a teenager, is that the committee that decides this, there's 16 members, and they don't meet till 2027. Former Reds teammate Tony Perez is one of the people in this committee who was a good friend of Pete Rose and probably knew him about as long as anybody in baseball. And their time goes way back to the minor leagues. Rose still has to be voted on by 12 out of the 16 members, and he may not make it on the first time they vote, and that remains to be seen. But I think he'll eventually make it. I just hope it's before I die, too, because I'd like to see it, too. And my dad didn't live to see it, but I kind of hope I do, because I'd like to see him in the Hall of Fame. I saw an interview yesterday with Fawn Rose, Pete's daughter, and Pete Jr., his son, and it was pretty clear to me that both of them wanted to see this happen, and they were happy about it, and they were sad that they couldn't call him and tell him about it, because it was just, even if he hadn't gotten the Hall before he died, if he'd just known that he would be removed from the ineligible list, I guarantee Pete Rose would have been thrilled about that. And knowing that would have meant a lot to an old man that was 83 when he passed away, and probably should have happened when he was about 80. And I think Major League Baseball should be ashamed of how they handled this thing. Yes, Rose earned his penalty, but by the time Rose was a decrepit old man, about 80-some years old, they should have removed him from the eligible list like they've done now since he died. And I wanted to see him in there. I think he deserves to be in there for what he did on the field. And I know about all the problems he had off the field. But I believe Rose deserves to be in baseball's Hall of Fame. Anyway, that's what happened this week. I thought I should bring it up and mention it on here. I thought it'd be remiss if I didn't. Anyway, I want to thank you all for stopping in. Talk to you again soon. Bye now.